one of the first things they love to do, because that's the low-hanging fruit from an audit perspective, is to say, well, where's your processes? Oh, you're not following your processes. How much of what you do is manual? So how do we know you guys are not doing funky stuff?
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. Today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Pieter Reynders. He is currently a program manager working with Lendlease. A lot of his work is involving large organizational transformational exercises and projects. So Pieter, thank you so much for joining me.
Big pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. So obviously that was a very brief introduction there, but what I might do is pass the ball to you to talk about, I guess, specifically how your work led you to working on processes and where that interest first came from. And then I guess a brief timeline or history from there to where you are today.
Yeah, so the first time I got involved seriously involved in processes and process mapping and process methodology was about 13 years ago, when the CIO that I was reporting into, he was a bit of a scatterbrain, but an interesting person nonetheless, and he had different ideas every week of what everyone should do. And he just said one day, you're going to run this big transformation program for HR, payroll, and finance. I guess what I want you to do is I want you to sit in on the training with the team that will do all the process mapping for us. And I think you've got to be trained on the tool and the methodology, and not something I wanted to do because my focus was project management. It was valuable nonetheless, because it really got my interest. And I guess also the vendor who did that part of the exercise was quite good at what they did. That's all they did.
Right.
So, I think I kind of learned from a pretty good bunch of guys. They were working a lot in compliance, risk, and with the banks. Mm-hmm. A very rigorous process that they applied. But what I did like about what they did, which got my interest really going, was the way they dumbed down the process to be still a structured, analytical abstraction of the process modeling and the process abstraction method, but it was dumbed down enough so that you can reuse it on a functional level. And I thought that was incredibly valuable. And that was where I got interested in making the process mapping and the process documentation a very big part of the type of projects that I would do. For various reasons that I would imagine we would get into a bit later. But I immediately recognized the value of that, helping your transformation process, helping you manage change, and also getting a return on investment on the big change that you are making.
Right. And there's going to be a diverse range of people that are listening to the interview right now, or obviously when we release it. But let's just say there's someone that is in an organization, they don't have a very mature process framework or mindset. They might be asking the question, well, Pieter, what is BPM? I've heard of the phrase before. I know there are a number of definitions and descriptions out there, but I guess so we have a grid and an understanding for what you're talking about. What is BPM to you?
So I guess it's a lot of things to a lot of different people, depending on who you ask. As I said, when we tied up this interview, I do not approach it from the strict methodological and tool set perspective. I do it from a transformation project management perspective. So for me, the business process management or mapping approach is a way where I document the processes in a practical and understandable way so that I can redistribute and reuse those processes for training, for embedment of the processes, for managing the change, and making sure that people understand what the processes are so that they follow them, and that the return on investment with the huge money organizations are spending on these programs are actually realized in the right way. So for me, it is more than just the methodology. It is more than just the tool. It is the way you adapt the tool and the methodology to be fit for purpose for that particular project, so that people can actually find it useful.
Right.
And what it's not is I think a lot of people think about it as someone draws something on Visio that falls off the page and no one can follow it, no one can understand it, because it's not done in the right method, right? So, and that's why I think a lot of people see very little value in it.
Right.
Because some people have very little knowledge of how to properly present it, either in terms of the tool set or in terms of the way they map it, mixing up different levels of detail and complexity in the process, instead of going through a structured way of mapping out those processes so that people can understand it.
Right, right. And when, I guess, embarking on a transformational or an organizational transformation exercise or project, what are some of the, are you facing much resistance or objections from senior management in regards to the process work? Is there, I guess by that stage, by the time they've brought you in, it's all steam ahead. But I guess for someone that's listening right now, that they're like, our organization can do a whole lot more and do a whole lot better if we understand our processes. But obviously they need to pitch that to senior management. So what's I guess some of the resistance or objections that one might face when trying to pitch, I guess, effective process management within their organization?
I think you face resistance on different levels. I think, yes, management think it's not necessary. And they go, oh, another 3-6 months where you have to pay a team of 3 or 4 guys big money to do it. They don't find that palatable. There's also resistance from an IT perspective, because a lot of times IT goes, oh, we're not using that tool, use this one. And it's 9 out of 10 times not fit for purpose. And also it is very hard to get that past. We first need to, investigate this, whether it fits in with our IT strategy and whether the security around it is good and all those type of discussions. So it is very often a very hard sell. I think in mature organizations, it is less of a hard sell. Where I find the easiest time to sell it is when you're going through RFP.
Right.
All right. That's the time you must sell it. If I've never been able to really turn an organization once I come into the project. I've been asked to come in as a turnaround manager a number of times.
Right.
Project that's gone south.
Okay.
And then the budget's always under pressure. People already have an expectation of what the project will cost. It's very, very hard to get that across the line. So if you can do that from day one, you set the expectations right and go, look, before you even do the project, let's sit with the vendor and the users is going to use the system. And, let's just go through all of this and make it all part of your RFP, make it all part of your initial budget and your initial planning, even before you start requirements.
Right, right.
You can, yeah. I can get a lot into what is the technical right approach to how to incorporate the process mapping or process modeling in your requirements process, but I guess that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, obviously, like within 30 minutes, we can only scrape the surface on a couple of topics. So, for some of the people I've interviewed, we've even talked about doing follow-up interviews in the future at some point. So, but yeah, I guess the next area that I'd be interested to know is the value of processes within training, transformation, and change. Obviously, you're working on some pretty large programs, some pretty large transformational programs, and so I guess I'd be interested to know how the value of processes within training, transformation, and change.
I think understanding and mapping or modeling the processes that you are going to use with a new technology that you implement, with the transformed teams that will be using it, it's very vital that you model or map these processes in such a way that it can be understood and consumed later on. It is vitally important to understand that as part of the scope of change, because if you think about transformation as resting on the trinity of process, technology, and people,
Right.
the process has about a third of the importance that people and technology has.
Right.
Process in some organizations equal people, so I guess process is a much underrated area of the transformation process. And I think giving it, a bigger piece of your attention is vitally important, because how do you know what's your training effort? How do you know what's your gap if you haven't at least mapped out your to-be processes? You probably in some cases don't need to know what as is, because that's over and done with. You're just going to have new processes running. So just at least understand what they are, so that the guy's training understands at least what is the scope or the challenge. Also the functional teams that are transformed, that will be using these new processes, and many times new people, because sometimes you have to bring in new people that understand the new technology. Some people just can't move with it. So you need to, how are these new teams and new people going to use it? It's vitally, vitally important that you are able to communicate that. So we'll get into that question a bit later, I understand, about what is your return on investment, because if you do it properly, people don't follow the processes, and your investment is not fully leveraged, because people revert back to manual processes because they don't understand what they need to do with the new processes and technology.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into that now. Let's talk about, seeing as we're on it, or we're starting to talk about it, let's talk about the value or the return on investment, because that's obviously a big question that senior management or that C-level exec's going to be asking is, what's the value? Where's the return on investment? And if we're going to pour so much money into it, I guess what's that time frame from until I can start seeing a return to make this investment worthwhile?
Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of where, probably one of the best examples where I could see an immediate return on investment.
Right.
Was in the Middle East. I worked for a very large construction company, 40,000+ people. Jordan, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, so across 3 regions and time zones.
Right.
So we implemented a workforce management system. We had 39,000 laborers.
Wow.
And we had about 6,000+ roughly, with the joint ventures included of staff, expats with very complex expat remuneration.
Right.
That wasn't a problem, but the complexity lied in getting all these 39,000 laborers to start clocking on electronic clocks, right? And the process was, unlike in Australia, they only got paid once a month.
Right.
Right. And because the previous process was a paper-based approach, you had about 500 timekeepers that on the last day of the month start to key in paper timesheets, doing the activity-based costing. Was the guy working on stonemasonry? Was he doing formwork? Was he doing steel fixing? Was he digging a trench? What was he doing?
Right.
It took them roughly 30 days. So then they paid the guy at the end of the next month. So the guy started working on the 1st of June, got paid for the work he did from the 1st of June till the 30th of June on the 31st of July.
Right.
Okay. Now, after we implemented the workforce management system with a new single payroll, we had 8 different payrolls at the time.
Okay.
And with something like 34 different payroll staff members doing payroll.
Right.
Got that down to 6, running it off one single payroll.
Wow.
And the first pay run we did was for that 39,000 employees that normally takes a month to do was 4 days.
Right. Wow.
Okay. Now, it wasn't pretty. I can assure anyone listening in it. we rolled it out in 6 months. So you can imagine it was really, really ugly.
Yes.
The value was immediate.
Right.
And I think what helped us was the fact that we did go through this process mapping exercise. We could distribute the process maps very easily. You could either mail them, you could extract them from the tool as a little image or a bitmap and send it out to a timekeeper having trouble. Yeah, we supported them on the phone, etc., like what you would normally do.
Mm-hmm.
There, I would say, the guys in the first run about the 60%, process adherence, and then we got it up to 70, 80, 90, going on from there. But there was an instance where I think mapping out the processes helped us, immediately realizing the investment into buying a very expensive enterprise class tier 1 workforce management system and payroll. Probably the reduction of payroll staff and timekeepers, which we could reduce with more than 60%,
right,
for itself in, I guess, 3 or 4 months. So,
yep.
Yeah, I just absolutely believe that understanding what your processes are can help you to leverage that return on investment. If you don't know what they are, how do you even know that you're getting your return on investment?
Right, right. Now, there are some organisations out there that they've gone through the exercise of having their processes documented. Maybe they're sitting in work manuals or procedures, and they've been sitting there for 5 years collecting dust. I guess talk to us a little bit about the importance of not just documenting the processes, but having that continuous improvement, whether it's incremental or whether incremental improvements or whether it's radical innovation. Talk to us about, I guess, the importance of those two things, and I guess where both of those play a role, play a part.
Okay, so I think it's a very difficult question to answer in a simple way.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first thing is the fact that processes are in a manual is your first problem.
Right.
Processes should never be in a manual in words. It should be in pictures, and it should be available. So the tool that I used more than once is called Enterprise Architect, which is an Aussie tool, and all of these tools are the same. You create an HTML export, you put it down on some other website or SharePoint, and people can go into it, click through it. I mean, all of these tools are as your product, whatever, you can do this. And I think communicating that and helping people to navigate through the visual of the process is absolutely key. I don't write down process. I used to do it 20, 25 years ago when I was young and inexperienced. Now that I know better, I just think that if processes aren't in a picture, no one will follow them. I think that's the first thing.
Yes.
Secondly, if processes, as I said, are not accessible and easily accessible and easily consumable, you are not able to articulate or communicate or convey them.
Right.
So that's answering, I guess, the first part of your question. Now, the second part is, how do you embed these processes and get people to stick to it? I can take you through a number of examples where I did transformations where people did not stick to it. And it's very frustrating. What you need is a buy-in from your functional business owners when that project is done, during your transition and operational acceptance of the transformation program, as you transition into production, as you transition into the operational acceptance where operations accept the new processes, the new technology, and embed that with their teams and their people. They need to buy into that in a serious way. and believe that these processes are really what they need to drive their functions forward and save them time. That means they needed to have been part of that process modeling or process mapping effort prior to that point. So
Right.
you have to take your stakeholders with you on the journey.
Yes.
And then the third question is, what do you then do? Do you, or the third part of the answer is, what do you then do? Do you take these guys through an incremental process of improving it, or do you do a, throw away the old and bring in the new completely and basically a smash and grab approach?
Yeah.
I do not believe in an incremental improvement process.
Right.
And I'll tell you why. So I think there are instances where you cannot just come in with a whole bunch of new processes because the risk is too big.
Right.
I would say if you are involved in, let's say, for example, very complex manufacturing, high risk, very technical type of manufacturing processes, yes, of course, there you cannot just like come in with a whole new raft of measures and processes and just replace them without testing, without prototyping, whatever. And there, the incremental approach is better.
Right.
When you do the type of work that I do, which focuses mostly on back end or back office processing, like payroll, accounts payable, treasury, these processes are pretty similar. Doesn't matter where you go in the world. So I've worked in 3 different continents, and payroll, accounts payable, treasury, journaling, all of these processes are pretty much similar, right? There's your HR process from hire to retire. There can be company differences, but in general, on a high level, all these things are pretty much similar.
Right.
So a very good friend of mine's, very famous guy, Rakesh Sangani he's one of the top global influencers on shared services and process transformation.
Right.
He says, now he borrowed a few things from me, so I think he will excuse me or from borrowing a few of his sayings. And he says, for instance, if I'm asked to do an accounts payable transformation, I don't go in and say, okay, let's see how we can incrementally improve this process.
Yes, right.
As I said, I think that's fit for purpose with complex manufacturing or something similar, but not with these back-end type of processes and areas that I work in. And he would just simply say, I'm not interested in achieving incremental increases. Accounts payable should be simple. Why is this company's accounts payable process not simple?
Right.
It's standard, right? Yeah, you might have a few things that are organizational specific. We get that, but it's a standard process. Why is it convoluted? He rather asks that question. It should be simple. Why is it not?
Yes.
Crash and burn and say, well, here's the best way, best practice way of doing it, which I know best practice has got a few problems, to the term, but I guess there's a lot of value in what he's saying. And it's the same with payroll. I ran big payroll functions as well, and some HR and HR admin functions.
Mm-hmm.
They are similar. Doesn't matter where you go. So I would rather go like, it should be simple. It should be like this. Let's just see why they're not. Is there something specific that warrants a deviation, or can we get away with a simple, straightforward answer? Right.
Now,
I've said there are exceptions. I accept that.
Yeah.
Saying for in the area that I work in, I don't think it's a good investment to try and incrementally improve it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, before you mentioned about obviously getting buy-in from the key stakeholders that would need to be involved in the processes, but once you've got those processes managed and modeled out somewhere, how do you get buy-in from the general employee or the non-IT person that's going to be conducting and carrying out these processes? Obviously, I'd imagine, at least, I'd assume that there would be in some organizations, there would be some sort of resistance there potentially from employees that, because it's quite a big change going from the way they've always done things to now we're using this system and here are all of the processes here. Talk to us a little bit about that, I guess, how an organization should go about trying to get buy-in from everyone and not just the key stakeholders.
So I think the first thing that needs to be in place is you have to have executive buy-in and support in your transformation program. Mm-hmm. Without that, you can almost resign. There were a few times in my life where I thought I'll tough it out, but looking back at it, if I have to do some of those again, I'd go, I'm not your guy. Right? So because you waste your time trying to fight a losing battle, right? I would say if there's not C-level buy-in and sponsorship in this, don't even try it, because it's just going to be a long, hard slog that won't deliver the value you're looking for. I think once that is established, you need that mid to senior level management buy-in. If you've got the C-level buy-in, you normally have the buy-in from these guys, because these are the next in line to move up in the ranks, right? And they know they've got a stake in their future careers to be working with you. They could show what they're made of if it's successful. And it's really engaging with those guys to provide you with the right, hands-on people that will be using the systems and processes. And then you bring them into the project, from process modeling through to requirements, through to testing, through to operational acceptance and transition, and return those guys back into the business. Then you have an advocate, if you like, right? Every single area, not just for the process, but also for the technology. And because they're one of them now, you address the people issue at the same time. Right. I think approaching it from those three levels down and getting those guys involved are vitally important. That's why I say it's such a big investment. If you don't get that right during RFP, where all these guys are sitting in a room making the decisions, telling them, setting the expectations from day one, it's pretty hard to be done and agreed after that. Right. And I've referred to a number of times where I was asked to come in as a turnaround manager. Now, they're the hardest, but what's also hard is if you come in right in the beginning of the project where there was another guy, another project manager or program manager, something didn't work out, or the guys are already halfway through requirements and you asked to come in. Yeah. The reason, that's also basically too late, right? So if you can get right in there in the RFP, we get the C-level buy-in, mid to senior level manager buy-in, and then appeal to them, give me your hands-on guys that will be working with us, ingest them into the project. That's the way you do it. There's no other way for it to work. You can do it, but I don't think it would work. Yeah, right. And I know that from a previous sort of conversations we've had or emails back and forward, an area of interest for you is process compliance as a measure of success. Talk to us a little bit about what that means. Obviously, there'd be some listeners that would understand that, and then there'd be some people listening right now that they're at step one, baby step one. So what is process compliance and how is that a measure of success? Right. So process compliance, I guess, can mean a number of things. I guess if you're looking at banks and security and government, where I also worked in, it means probably something slightly different than, just running a payroll for, a company, where process compliance simply mean you comply with the agreed process. Right. Now, to follow the agreed process is sometimes much harder than what you think, right? And having worked in payroll a lot of times, your arch enemy is always internal audit. The things, or even working in like some of the finance functions, like the treasury stuff I did, there's also a lot of internal audit scrutiny in those areas. So one of the first things they love to do, because that's the low-hanging fruit from an audit perspective, is to say, well, where's your processes? Oh, you're not following your processes. Okay, how much of what you do is manual? Oh, 30 to 40%. Oh, okay, so you post all these manual entries into the journals and to the general ledger. So how do we know you guys are not, doing funky stuff you're doing, right? So I guess the compliance is about being able to articulate these processes in a way, as I said before, that everyone can understand it, including internal audit, and say, show to us where we are not following these processes.
Right.
Now, one of the examples where I felt that process was not followed where it should have been was we put in a new payroll, also a big company, 15,000 people on the payroll.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a number of manual processes that was followed in the old regime when the old payroll system was used, where it could not produce the complexity of financial entries that was required.
Right.
So the senior vice president of finance was one of the sponsors and the person I reported into. And she was pretty good in saying, I want every single payroll accounting process automated.
Right.
And I like that, because that is a big challenge, because normally it's very hard to get that right.
Right.
So we had to design the system. It was an enterprise class system, so it could actually do it if you follow the process,
mm-hmm.
to automate every single accounting process, payroll accounting process. We got there 95%, which is a pretty good rate. But very soon after implementation, one of the things that we automated was the posting of the journals for what we know in Australia as superannuation.
Yes.
It was called gratuity.
Right.
There was, for senior people, there was an additional component that was known as pension. So there were these two parts, and both of the pension and gratuity, which together would make up what we know in Australia as super, was done manually in the old system. And just the power of habit from finance was to keep on posting these things manually, and then calling us and say, we saw the payroll posted these journals for gratuity and pension, but we already posted the journals. And then we would have to re-educate them and say, remember, we said the payroll is now going to do it for you. Oh, but we don't believe the numbers. and that becomes a very difficult conversation to have, because you then got to take examples, sit down with them with Excel or a calculator and go, let's work it out. And they go, but that's not how the old system worked. Well, forget that. This is now how this system works, right? And to take them through that process. And, that's the hard thing. And if they don't follow that, so we spent millions of dollars to get it there. Now part of the payback and part of the value is to say finance spend 4 hours per week to post these journals, right? What does that equate to over a year? And we had, something like 50 different properties.
Right. Wow.
Little team or, a finance guy. So 50 to 52 individuals, arguably, spending 4 hours per week posting, reposting, reversing journals. Now, if you add all that time up, you end up with a big number, right? Yeah. That almost pays for just the payroll system component, let alone the GL and, treasury and all that. Right? It just pays for the payroll component in less than 2 years, right?
Wow.
These guys do not follow that process. It means that payback formula doesn't work anymore, because they actually now spending 4 hours doing the old process. They now spend 6 or 8 hours because they now phone the payroll team and pick a fight about why they think the journals are wrong.
Right.
Now, there probably in hindsight were ways of getting the guys over the line by letting them see the light, why the new numbers weren't wrong. But you can see that the value of your whole return on investment is destroyed by thinking that's the payback you get and then you're not getting it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, wow. So obviously, guys, everyone that's listening right now, we can only cover so much in 30 minutes. We can only scrape the surface of a number of different topics. And but I know that everything that Peter's been talking about over the last half an hour has been very valuable. And I'm sure a lot of you are learning and gleaning a lot. And we'll I guess, want to continue this process of learning and researching and understanding, okay, where is our organisation at, and what does our organisation need to move forward and to progress. But Peter, I just want to thank you so much for giving us your time and your knowledge today.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Big pleasure.